Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. Thank you for coming back to my channel. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew to Saudi Arabia the other day in a bid to persuade Riyadh to pump more oil to try and keep oil prices down because of the war in Ukraine. Oil and gas prices are going up. The United Kingdom, the United States are trying to stop buying Russian oil and gas more or less immediately. The European Union is seeking to phase it out over the next 7 years. But people have said, well, as Keir Starmer said, Bojo is going from one dictator to another. Now that's true, but the way ill fortune would have it, most of the hydrocarbons in the world belong to tyrannical states. So they also call it the curse of the resource-rich country, that other areas of the economy don't develop, and these countries are quite often dictatorships. But people have challenged me, well, why don't you call out the Saudi Arabian regime? And so I shall. And nothing in this allocution is remotely anti-Saudi Arabian. I lived there for a few years as a child. People aren't bad for being Saudi Arabian. The Saudi Arabians whom I really liked. And there are some attractive aspects of their culture. They certainly value their family a lot. You could like their music or watching camel racing or horse racing or things like that, or some Islamic architecture, or I like listening to the cantillation of the Quran, not that I can comprehend it. So I'm not insulting Saudi Arabians as a whole. I'm just feeling sorry for them because they're lorded over by this morally bankrupt, deeply corrupt regime, the House of Saud. So it's almost an absolute monarchy. They do have some elected parliament. They've got that in recent years on a non-party basis, but within a very narrow ideological field. Only people like that can even be elected. And it's true that there has made headway the last few years. Mohammed bin Salman, he's the crown prince. He's the effective ruler of the country because his father, King Salman, is indisposed, has not been seen in public for several years. MBS is a reformer with regard to women's rights, but considering it's absolutely bottom of the pile out of 193 countries in the world, that's not fantastic progress. They couldn't possibly get worse. The only way was up. Okay, the Taliban's come in and probably be even worse than Saudi Arabia. A lot of young Saudi Arabians are fed up with the situation. The junior generation, more highly educated, much more likely to speak fluent English. Often they've studied abroad, even women. I've met even Saudi Arabian teenage girls who've been going to language schools in the United Kingdom. So they're aware that the rest of the world is very, very different. Remoteness is over a long time ago. They've got YouTube and Instagram, and they know what's going on in Hollywood. They're following celebrities. But anyway, what's so terrible at the Saudi Arabian regime? The way, obviously, there's this rule by royal fiat. It's a bit like Lord Acton said, his celebrated dictum that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. Or what was that Plato came up with that paradigm of that magic ring giving you invisibility, and would you abuse this power to do wrong? And yes, the temptation will be irresistible for most people. You see that in the Saudi Arabian government. So they have unfair trials. The opacity of their juridical system is notorious. Torture is used on a fairly wide scale that's been very well documented by numerous human rights organizations for decades. Homosexuality is illegal. I believe I'm correct in saying it's punishable by death. So they use the death penalty promiscuously, and perhaps I should have led with this. The other day they executed 81 men in one day. So peaceful protest, that counts as terrorism under their law. The Shia minority is severely oppressed to the extent the Saudi Arabian government won't even admit the Shias exist, and they can't get high government jobs. They can't get permissions to construct new mosques. They're often very cramped in certain villages in the eastern province, actually where most of the oil is. So it's a paranoid state. What else is wrong with the system? I mean, there are these Gastarbeiter from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines and so forth, and they're often living in semi-servitude. Their passports are taken, they can't leave, the law is entirely on the side of the employer, and they can't assert their rights, they can't take legal action if their wages are withheld, they're often paid a fraction of the wages that were actually promised in the contract, and so forth, working very long hours without a day off for months on end. It's terrible. So there's a gross injustice. There's no freedom of expression. You don't have the right to complain. And they say that the legal system, as I say, is well, deeply unfair, and these people are clerics who are chosen for their obscurantism, closed-mindedness, their adherence to the Wahhabi ideology. People say that their progress is being made. So a lot of the junior generation are fed up with this situation. And people thought it was maybe in a pre-revolutionary stage a few years ago. Now, MBS has managed to buy people off by allowing women to drive, by reopening cinemas, which were closed in the early 1980s, by still maintaining his rule by decree, but allowing people to have more fun, a bit of entertainment. Some rock concerts have been allowed, but only Saudi males are allowed to go, and they must wear traditional Saudi Arabian dress. So obviously, they've been fighting in Yemen for several years, and people say, well, this is like Russia invading Ukraine. Well, not quite. They're there with the invitation of the Yemeni government intervening in this civil war, and they're fighting against the Houthi rebels, the Houthi who are a Shia minority in Yemen, backed by Iran. So sort of a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a little bit like Syria, where Iran and Saudi Arabia take opposite sides. So it's definitely bad news, a Saudi Arabian regime. What would I like? I would like to see a free country. It's true that not everybody wants democracy. Maybe it's not a suitable system for every country. Perhaps it can't be grafted on to every country. Yeah, the 2 young gay men were hanged in public. I think that's Iran, way back in about 2004. Jamal Khashoggi. Well, Jamal Khashoggi, famously, he went to the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey in 2018 to process his marriage to a Turkish citizen, to get some of the paperwork sorted in advance, and he never came out of there. Well, maybe he did, but in bits. So the Turks somehow bugged the consulate, and they found that he was somehow overpowered, possibly stunned, killed, cut up with a bone saw into little bits, which were then taken and buried somewhere around Istanbul. A special hit team of MBS's security detail, they flew in there hours before the murder, knowing that Khashoggi had booked an appointment to do this, so they're murdering him on Saudi Arabian soil, and they didn't understand what the fuss was about. We killed one of our people, a Saudi, we killed him on Saudi soil, technically, our consulate in Turkey. So why are the Turks perturbed by this? And the Saudis even had a guy who looked a bit like Khashoggi, dress up in similar clothes, leave the consulate and walk up and down the street to try and give the impression, no, he left her alive, lying and lying and lying that they hadn't killed him. And they had no explanation for how he'd vanished into thin air the moment he set foot in their consulate. The last minute, all the Turkish staff had been given the day off in the consulate to try and get the witnesses out of the way, which is completely uncharacteristic for the Saudi Arabian consulate. So there's lots of terrible about it in terms of women's rights. Saudi Arabia was not great. So yes, it is worse than Russia. But anyway, it's not invading another country right now. It's not the greatest threat to global security. You want heating in the winter? You want electricity? In which case we have to buy oil and gas. You've got to buy it from somewhere. And no, you can't choose the political systems of the country you buy it from. And that is the harsh reality. And if you don't accept that, we can buy it from very few countries and the price will be much, much higher. Right, thank you for watching my channel. So please donate to me on Patreon. Okay, so georgecallahan79@gmail.com. Toodaloo.